Imagine waking up in the morning and eating what most people believe is a perfectly normal breakfast: a bowl of cereal, a glass of orange juice, maybe pancakes or a crepe with chocolate spread. It tastes great, it feels comforting, and millions of people start their day exactly this way. But inside your body, something dramatic might be happening. Your blood sugar could be rising like a roller coaster, shooting up quickly and then crashing down. These sudden rises and drops are called glucose spikes, and they might be silently affecting your health every single day. In this video, we're exploring a powerful idea from the book Entity Book, Glucose Revolution. Jess Glucose Revolution stand what glucose spikes are, why they happen, and why controlling them could transform your long-term health. A typical morning. The author shares a simple memory from her childhood. Every morning before school, she would wake up just a few minutes before leaving the house. She would rush to the kitchen, heat a pan, melt some butter, pour crepe batter onto it, flip the crepe, and spread a thick layer of Nutella on top. Then she would fold it and eat it quickly before heading out the door. Meanwhile, her mother sat at the table enjoying what many people consider a healthy breakfast: a bowl of cereal with milk and sugar, and a glass of orange juice. At first glance, there seems to be nothing unusual about this scene. In fact, millions of people around the world eat similar breakfasts every day: cereal, toast, pancakes, pastries, juice. These foods are common, convenient, and often marketed as healthy. But hidden inside them is something extremely powerful: a large amount of sugar and starch. And when we eat them, something important begins to happen inside our bodies. What happens after we eat? When food enters the digestive system, the body starts breaking it down. Foods that contain starch and sugar are eventually converted into a simple molecule called glucose. Glucose is the body's main source of energy. After digestion begins, glucose travels from the stomach into the small intestine. From there, it passes through the intestinal wall and enters the bloodstream. Once it reaches the bloodstream, glucose starts traveling through tiny blood vessels called capillaries. From those tiny vessels, it moves into larger blood vessels that carry it throughout the body. You can imagine this like cars entering a highway system. Small roads lead into larger roads, and eventually everything connects into a massive transportation network. In the same way, glucose moves through the body so that every organ and every cell can access energy. But the amount of glucose in the bloodstream matters a lot. Too little glucose makes us feel weak and tired. Too much glucose can slowly damage the body. That's why scientists and doctors measure glucose levels carefully. How glucose levels are measured. Doctors typically measure glucose levels by analyzing a blood sample. The result shows how much glucose is present in the bloodstream at that moment. This measurement is usually written in milligrams per deciliter, or mg/dL. Some countries use another measurement called millimoles per liter, but both represent the same concept: how much glucose is circulating inside the body. There is also a device called a continuous glucose monitor, often called a CGM. Instead of drawing blood, this small device sits on the skin and measures glucose in the fluid between fat cells. This allows scientists to observe how glucose levels change throughout the day. And when researchers began looking closely at these glucose patterns, they noticed something fascinating. The real issue isn't just high glucose. The bigger problem is something called glucose spikes. Understanding glucose spikes. A glucose spike happens when blood sugar rises rapidly after eating and then drops again shortly afterward. These spikes happen when the body suddenly receives a large amount of glucose from food. According to the Entity Organization, American Diabetes Association be between 60 and 100 milligrams per deciliter. A fasting level between 100 and 126 is considered prediabetes. Anything above 126 is considered diabetes. But some researchers believe the healthiest fasting range may actually be narrower. Some studies suggest that the ideal range may be between 72 and 85 milligrams per deciliter. The important point is that even if your fasting glucose appears normal, you can still experience significant spikes after meals. These spikes often go unnoticed because most people never measure their glucose throughout the day. In the book, a glucose spike is defined as an increase of more than 30 milligrams per deciliter after eating. For example, if your glucose rises from 90 to 125 after a meal, that already counts as a spike. But many meals cause much larger increases. The breakfast spike. Let's return to the breakfast example. The author discovered that her mother's breakfast created a massive glucose spike. Her mother's fasting glucose level was around 100 milligrams per deciliters. After eating cereal with milk, sugar, and orange juice, her glucose level jumped to 180 milligrams per deciliters. That's an increase of 80 milligrams per deciliters. This is far beyond the recommended spike range. And surprisingly, this type of spike is extremely common. Many traditional breakfasts, especially those based on refined grains and sugary drinks, cause glucose to rise rapidly. After the spike comes the crash. The body releases insulin to lower glucose levels quickly. As a result, blood sugar drops again. This rapid rise and fall can make people feel hungry again just a few hours after eating. It can also lead to fatigue, irritability, and cravings for more sugary foods, but the most concerning effect happens slowly over time. The long-term effects of spikes. When glucose spikes happen repeatedly every day, the body experiences something called glycemic variability. This simply means how much glucose levels fluctuate over time. Imagine drawing a graph of glucose levels throughout the day. If the graph shows smooth, stable lines, that's good for the body. But if the graph shows constant sharp peaks and deep crashes, that indicates high variability. High variability puts stress on the body. Over many years, repeated spikes can damage blood vessels, increase inflammation, and gradually raise fasting glucose levels. Eventually, this process can lead to metabolic diseases such as diabetes. The concerning part is that this damage begins long before any diagnosis appears. By the time someone is officially classified as prediabetic, the metabolic changes may have already been happening for years. Why some spikes are worse. Interestingly, not all spikes are equal. Two foods might produce identical glucose spikes on a graph, but one of those foods might actually cause more harm. The reason involves another type of sugar called fructose. Sweet foods contain table sugar, also known as sucrose. Sucrose is made of two molecules, glucose and fructose. When someone eats sweet foods like cupcakes, candy, or sweet spreads, their body experiences both a glucose spike and a fructose spike. However, glucose monitors can only detect glucose. They cannot measure fructose. That means when someone eats something sweet and sees a glucose spike on a monitor, there is also a hidden fructose spike happening at the same time. This invisible spike can place additional stress on the body. Because of this, spikes caused by sweet foods can sometimes be more harmful than spikes caused by starchy foods. The key idea. The main lesson from this chapter is simple but powerful. Health isn't only about avoiding diabetes. It's about managing the daily spikes in glucose that happen after meals. By reducing these spikes and keeping glucose levels more stable, we can lower the stress placed on the body. This idea is often described as flattening the glucose curve. A flatter curve means smaller rises, fewer crashes, and more stable energy throughout the day. Understanding this concept is the first step toward improving long-term metabolic health. And once you begin to notice how food affects your glucose levels, you start seeing everyday meals in a completely different way. Because what happens beneath the surface of the body often matters far more than what we see on the plate. If you found this summary helpful, consider subscribing for more insights from powerful books that can transform the way we think about health, psychology, and life.